Hey there, it's Kenzie from Details to Enjoy, and today I'm going to be showing you how I made the kits from the November and December size B box. I'm going to start off by painting everything, so I'm setting aside all of the papers and the felt pieces, and then I'm sorting everything by the color I'm going to paint it. First, I'm going to be using the color Silky White by Behr, and using a foam brush I'm going to paint just the tops of my pieces. When I'm using foam brushes, I usually let the paint soak into the brush rather than sit on top of the brush, and this helps me add less paint to my pieces, which is going to give me smoother, thinner coats and will prevent the paint from getting over onto the side of the piece. I do have a little bit of paint pooled up in the engraved line for his mouth, so I'm going to use a tack to gently remove that paint from the line. I do tend to have a little bit more paint on my brush when I'm working on an insert since I'm going over such a large surface, but I also make sure to smooth out any ridges and make sure that I don't have any pooled up paint. Once your paint is dry, you can add more coats until you're happy with the coverage. For our other insert, I'm going to be doing our color wash method, so I'm going to need a cup of water and a paint sponge. The first step is to rehydrate the sponge in the water until it is nice and soft. Then I'm going to add a few drops of water to the paint on my tray using my sponge to mix it in. With the color wash method, we want to see the texture of the MDF through the paint, so we're adding water to make the paint slightly transparent. I'm applying the paint to the insert using a swirling motion with my sponge. Then I'll set that aside to dry. Next, we'll be using some black paint and a new clean foam brush to paint some of our other pieces. I ended up painting 2 coats of the black onto these pieces. To paint the carrot nose, I'm going to be using our large detail brush along with the color Lucky Penny by Glidden. These brushes don't soak in the paint and it sits on top of the brush, so you want to make sure that you are definitely tapping off as much of the excess as you can. Then I'm just using my tack to clear out the engraved lines. To achieve a wood type look on the arms, we're going to be using BB Frosh dark wax and a wax cloth. You could also use brown paint, but we love the look that the wax gives, so we always keep a jar of this on hand. To use the wax, you'll add a little bit of the product to a corner of the wax cloth and then use that to rub the wax onto your piece. And then with wax, you always want to remember wax on, wax off, so once you've applied the wax, you'll use a clean area of the cloth to remove any of the excess product. Your piece shouldn't feel tacky anymore once the excess has been removed. Our present pieces are going to be covered in paper, and so for this we're going to need scissors, an emery board, and a glue stick. We designed these 2 custom papers, both on craft and white, and today we're going to be using the white version, so I'm starting off by cutting out all of the individual patterns. Then I'm going to start laying out the patterns until I have chosen which papers I'm going to be using and where they will go. You could also use scrapbook paper for this step or even regular wrapping paper. Once I've decided the order, it's time to start adding the paper to the pieces. To attach the paper, I'm going to cover the entire piece of MDF with a glue stick, and I want to make sure that I'm getting the glue all the way to the edges. Then I'm going to place my paper onto the MDF piece, making sure that I'm happy with the placement of the pattern on the piece. I'll press that down and smooth it all out to make sure that it is stuck, and then repeat that process for all of the other pieces. On pieces where I really wanted to make sure that I had the pattern in the correct spot, I would use a pencil to help mark out where I wanted to have the pattern be. On some of the smaller pieces, I ended up cutting them down just a little bit, but you don't need to cut close to the edge of the piece. Now that all of the paper is attached, we're going to remove the excess paper from the edges using an emery board. Sanding from the front towards the back at about a 45-degree angle, I'm going to go around all of the edges until all of the excess paper has been removed. This is going to give us a super clean edge on all of our pieces. Next, I'm going to be using my sanding blocks to sand all of my painted pieces. I'll use the sanding block flat against the surface to do a smoothing sand. And on my smaller pieces, I'll also do a distressing sand by using the sanding block at about a 45-degree angle along the side. Sanding is always one of our favorite steps because it really does take our pieces to the next level and make them look really professional. Then I'm using a clean dry rag to wipe up any of the excess dust. Now we're going to add some string to our presents. You can get creative with decorating your gifts, but if you're going to be doing the same 3 wraps that I'm going to show, I would recommend doing them in the opposite order of what I'm showing. For this first one, I'm going to be wrapping the string around my largest present, and I left a little bit of excess when I started to wrap so that I would have room to tie my knot once I was finished wrapping. On this next one, I'm going to be doing the typical cross wrap, so I'm putting my piece face down and then tying a single knot on the back, then switching directions, wrapping that around to the front, and then securing it in place. You can always look on Pinterest for gift wrap ideas to come up with other ways that you could decorate your presents. And finally, I'm going to be tying a little bow for the top of my tag, and this is the one that I recommend starting with so that you make sure that you have plenty of string to work with. Now I'm going to start attaching all of my pieces to my insert, but first I'm going to place them all on the insert without adhesive to make sure that everything is centered and laid out the way I want it to be. Then starting with this middle piece, I'm going to use the peel and stick adhesive backing to attach these pieces. Once this piece is in place, I'm going to use a ruler just to make sure that everything is centered and I'm happy with the placement. And if I need to make any adjustments, I can. The nice thing about this peel and stick adhesive is that you do have a little bit of working time where you can move things around before it is completely cured. On some of the presents with the wrap string, you may need to use hot glue to keep it secured in place just because we're adding extra bulk with the string. Next, we need to assemble the felt flower for this kit. So when you're assembling the felt flowers, you always want to make sure that you're starting from the outside of the spiral, and this is where you're going to start rolling up your flower. So in the center here, I'm rolling it up pretty tightly, but as I go along, the petals will start to fan out and it will naturally flatten out a little bit. If you aren't happy with how it's rolling up, you can always unroll it and start again. Once you reach the end, you're going to secure your flower with some hot glue. There's a little flap here, and you're going to place the hot glue on the back of the flower and then press that flap into the hot glue. Then you can add another dab of hot glue to the back to attach your leaf, and then you will attach this flower to your insert with more hot glue. I'm also going to use a small dab of hot glue to attach the bow to the top of my tag. Now we're ready to assemble our snowman, and first we need to tie the scarf around the snowman. You'll want to make sure that the right side of the scarf is slightly longer than the left. Then you'll cross it over right over left, and then the right side will go underneath the left side and you'll pull it tight. Once your knot is nice and tight, you'll want to make sure that the scarf is sitting at the correct place on your snowman, so I moved mine down a little bit, and now I'm going to use hot glue to hold this little flap in place. Then I'm going to cut a fringe into my scarf using a pair of scissors. I used just the tip of the scissors to make sure that I wasn't cutting too far up, and then I just eyeballed it to make sure that my little fringe pieces were about the same size. In your kit, you'll have a little package that has your hat pom-pom and the pom-pom eyes, and you just want to make sure that you're really careful when you're unpackaging this so you don't lose your little eyes. Next, we're going to determine where everything is going to be stuck down. So for this, I'm going to put the hat in place and the pom-pom so I know that I'm leaving enough room at the top for all of the pieces. Then I'm going to use the peel and stick adhesive backing to start attaching everything down. Once I had the backing removed from the back of the snowman, I just smoothed down the scarf and stuck it to the adhesive on that part. I'm adding the second hat piece on top of the first to create a little bit of dimension, and then I'm adding the carrot nose just above his mouth. The shorter arm is going on the left side onto the insert, and the longer arm is going on the right side on top of his body. I also decided to add another dab of hot glue on this side just to keep the other part of his scarf in place. I also used hot glue to attach the pom-pom onto the top of his hat. Since the eyes are so small, we want to take some extra precaution while gluing these on so that we don't burn ourselves. So I kept the back protective layer of the peel and stick from the back of the snowman, and then I'm going to be using tweezers to attach the eyes. So first I'm going to use some hot glue and get a dollop of that onto this little scrap piece, and then I'll use my tweezers to pick up one of the eyes, dip that into the glue, and then attach it to his face. You'll want to work fairly quickly so that you are dipping it into the glue before the glue has cooled and dried. So I actually ended up needing to squeeze another little dollop of glue for my second eye. And now both of my kits are done and ready to display in the pocket frames. If you make your own versions of these kits, we would love to see them. You can tag us in social media or Details to Enjoy on Instagram and Facebook.